You have never seen more clearly, and you have never felt less like yourself. Jung would not call this a breakdown. He would call it the dark night, and the person you were does not survive it. What you buried to be loved is already waking. You catch yourself mid-sentence, performing a person who no longer exists. The old self is collapsing while you watch. By the end, you will understand exactly what died and what walks out. You will understand why the person everyone relied on could not survive this, and why that was never a loss. You will see the mask you built in childhood to stay safe, and the silent contract that bound everyone who loved it instead of you. You will feel the shadow return, carrying everything you exiled to stay acceptable, and you will stand in the empty room between who you can no longer be and who you cannot yet name, because there is a version of you buried alive under all of it, breathing, listening to you perform. The dark night did not come to wound that self back to sleep. It came to end the one standing in its way. The cost of not knowing this is specific. You can spend an entire decade waiting to feel like yourself again, treating your own transformation as an illness to be cured, mistaking the most important passage of your life for a malfunction. You can reach 50 having rebuilt everything around a person who is no longer there, then wonder in the quiet why none of it feels like it belongs to you. Picture it plainly: a weekday, a conversation you have had 1,000 times. Someone asks how you are, and you give the answer that fits, smooth and complete, and as the words leave you, you feel the gap between the person saying them and whatever is actually standing behind your eyes. The performance is flawless. That is the horror of it. Some quiet part of you stands off to the side and thinks, with a flatness that frightens you, I am performing someone I used to be. Nobody at the table notices that the role is being played by no one. Only you can feel the empty chair where the self used to sit. So we are going to walk through this death the way it actually happens, in 3 stages, and I am going to name them now so your mind has a map for the descent. Stage 1, the dying, where the old self comes apart and you mistake the dissolving for damage. Stage 2, the empty room, the interval where you know exactly who you are no longer and cannot yet say who you are instead. And stage 3, what walks out, which is not a recovery and not a return, but the first version of you that was never built for anyone else's comfort. Most people stop after stage 1, the moment they finally understand the death. They never reach the part that redeems it. So stay through all 3, because there is one thing Jung understood about this death, about what it is actually for, that turns the whole loss inside out. It arrives in stage 3, and it changes the meaning of everything the first 2 stages take from you. So what is it exactly that dies in here? Because almost everyone gets the answer wrong, and the wrong answer is what keeps people trapped for years. The common idea is that the dark night strips away who you really are and leaves you hollow, that you are losing yourself, that the warm, capable, easy person you used to be was the truth, and this fracturing thing is the lie. That is exactly backward. What is dying was never the real you. Jung had a word for it: the persona. He took the term from the mask worn by actors in ancient theater, and he meant it without insult and without mercy. The persona, he wrote, is a compromise between the individual and society about how a person ought to appear. It is the face you assembled mostly before you were old enough to consent, to make yourself acceptable to the people whose love you could not survive losing. It is not a flaw. It is a survival strategy. And it worked, which is the whole problem. Think of the last time you made yourself smaller in a room without being asked to. Not a dramatic moment, the ordinary kind. You softened an opinion mid-sentence because you felt the temperature change. You laughed a beat too quickly to dissolve a tension that was not yours to manage. You said you did not mind when you minded. That fluent automatic adjustment is the persona doing its job, and it learned that job a long time ago in a house where being easy to love was the price of being loved at all. Jung was blunt about the danger here, and his warning is the spine of everything you are feeling. The risk, he said, is that you become identical with your persona, that you forget there was ever a difference between the mask and the face. The professor becomes only the professor. The reliable one becomes only the reliability. You wear the costume so completely and for so long that you lose the memory of the body underneath it, and you call the costume your character. And here is the belief that holds the whole thing together, the one you have never said out loud. You believe the performance is who you are. You believe that if the mask ever came off, there would be nothing underneath that anyone could love. That fear is the engine of the entire machine. It is also false, and the dark night is the thing that proves it false. And then something cracks it. The alchemists, whose work Jung spent decades decoding, called the first stage of any real transformation the nigredo, the blackening. Before any gold, the matter has to be broken down, putrefied, reduced to a black and formless state. It looked to them like death and decay. It was death and decay, and it was also the only doorway. Nothing transforms that is not first dissolved. Jung saw that the alchemists were not really describing metal. They were describing the soul of the person performing the operation, projected onto the substance in the flask. The blackening was a psychological event. It was this one. Jung did not learn this from a book. He lived it. After he broke with Freud, the man he had been came apart entirely. A respected doctor, a husband, an authority in his field, and then the ground he stood on was simply not there. He sat with the real fear that he was losing his mind. He filled the red leather book we now call the Red Book with the images that rose out of that darkness, not as a scholar studying the unconscious, but as a man being taken apart by it. And here is what matters for you. He did not come back as the doctor he had been. That man did not survive the descent. A different man came up, the one who would spend the rest of his life mapping the country he had nearly died crossing. He called those years the most important of his life. The breakdown was the source. He is proof, not metaphor, that the self which enters this does not return. So when the persona begins to fail, it does not feel like growth. It feels like rot. It feels like the lights going out one by one in a house you built. The competence that used to be effortless now requires a running start. The warmth you used to produce on demand will not come, and its absence makes you feel like a fraud, when in fact, its absence is the first honest thing that has happened to you in years. Here is the part that isolates people the most, so I want to name it precisely. There is a contract you signed that no one ever spoke aloud. Every relationship you built while wearing the mask was built with the mask. The people around you fell in love with a function. The endlessly available friend. The partner who never needed much. The one who absorbed the moods of the room so no one else had to. They did not agree to the person underneath because they were never shown that person, because you did not know that person was there. So when the persona starts to die and you begin, tentatively, to act from somewhere truer, the people closest to you do not celebrate. They resist. They tell you that you have changed, and they do not mean it kindly. They reach for the old version of you the way you reach for a light switch in a dark room, automatically, expecting it to be where it has always been. Understand what is happening when they do this. It is not betrayal, it is grief, theirs, arriving before yours. The familiar version of you made them feel safe, and your transformation is taking that safety away before they have any vocabulary for what is replacing it. They are not pulling you back because they are cruel. They are pulling you back because the mask was load-bearing in their lives too. Let me give that a face, because it is easier to feel than to define. Think of a man whose entire worth was being the one who fixes things. For 30 years, that was his whole identity. The person who showed up with the tools and the solution, who never needed anything because needing was for other people. His family ran on it. His marriage ran on it. Then one ordinary Sunday, he stood in his garage holding something broken and felt no will at all to repair it, and he understood he could not be the fixer for one more day. When he finally said he was tired, that he had been tired for years, the people who loved him did not soften. They asked when he would be back to normal. They missed the function. They had never actually met the man. That is the contract, paid in full, in a single conversation. And while that pressure comes from outside, something is rising from inside that frightens you more. The shadow returns what you buried. People hear the word shadow and imagine some monstrous evil hiding in the basement of the mind. That is the misconception, and it keeps people from looking. Jung meant something far more uncomfortable than evil. The shadow is everything real about you that had to be exiled so the persona could be accepted. For most people, that is not their cruelty. It is their anger, which was not allowed, their ambition, which was called selfish, their capacity to say no without a paragraph of apology attached, the desire that did not fit the role of the good one. So as the old self dies, you feel these exiled things come back up the stairs. A flash of rage at someone you have spent years accommodating, a want so naked it embarrasses you, a flat refusal that leaves your mouth before your manners can soften it. You think you are becoming a worse person. You are becoming a more complete one. The material was never gone. It was pressed down under the floorboards to keep the house quiet, and the dissolving of the floor is letting it breathe. And none of this stays in the mind. This is where people get lost, because they expect a death of identity to be a thought, and instead it arrives in the body. The nervous system kept the old self running, and it does not surrender the post easily. So the dissolution comes as exhaustion that sleep does not touch, as a tightness in the chest with no event attached to it, as a sudden, almost chemical pull toward the old distractions, the drink, the scroll, the person you know is wrong for you, because those things used to stabilize the structure that is now coming apart. That craving is not weakness of character. It is a body trying to reassemble a self it spent 30 years building, reaching for whatever used to hold the shape in place, which means the question is no longer what is happening to you. The question is what is underneath. Because there is an architecture beneath the self you perform, older than the mask, and the only way to it runs straight through the empty room the dying leaves behind. Let me ask you something directly, and answer it in the privacy where no one is performing for anyone. Have you caught yourself grieving lately with no idea who you are grieving? No one died. No one left. Nothing on the outside accounts for the weight of it. And still there are afternoons you move through mourning something you cannot name, until the day you look at it directly and understand the grief was aimed the whole time at you, not at a person who is gone, at a version of yourself that is not dead exactly, only no longer you. That is the strangest funeral a human being ever attends, the one held in silence, with no body and no date, for the self that did not survive the year, while you are still alive to sit through it. If you have felt that, you have crossed into the second stage, and there is something about it you need to understand before it convinces you that you are broken. And the reason you cannot rehearse your way back into that self is not a matter of effort, it is a law. Consciousness does not run in reverse. This is one of the hardest laws Jung ever described, and it is the one that ends the most suffering once you accept it. Once you have seen a thing clearly, you cannot unsee it. The moment you recognize the performance as a performance, the performance lost the one thing that made it work, which was your belief that it was you. You can still run the old routine. People do it for years, but you will know every single time that you are operating a puppet and that knowing is permanent. The door you came through does not open from this side. There is no version of more effort that returns you to innocence. So you arrive in the interval, the empty room, the place the whole culture has no name for, which is exactly why it is so lonely. And here is the one mercy available to you inside it. The empty room runs on the belief that you are the only one in it. So break that belief now. Before we go any deeper, leave one line in the comments, the version of you that is dying right now, named as plainly as you can manage. Then read what comes back. The replies under these videos are full of people describing the inside of your own head, and for a lot of them, that was the first light that ever reached this room. You do not have to stay in here alone. This is the hardest stretch, and I am not going to soften it. You know precisely who you are not anymore. You can list it. The roles you cannot perform with conviction, the relationships that no longer fit, the ambitions that turned to ash the moment you got close enough to touch them, but you cannot yet say who you are instead. There is no name available. The old name has come off and the new one has not arrived, and you are living in the space between, with full awareness and no identity to hang it on. Think of the last time someone asked you a simple question about your own life. What do you want? What are you going to do now? What makes you happy these days? And notice that the answer you used to give arrived first, automatic, already shaped, and then dissolved before it reached your mouth because you knew it was no longer true. So you said something vague to fill the silence. You said you were still figuring it out, and the smallness of that phrase did not begin to hold the size of what you were actually standing inside, which was not confusion but a kind of clearing, a field with everything cut down and nothing yet planted. That is the empty room. Not depression, though it can wear depression's clothes. Not failure, though it can feel like the cousin of failure. It is the specific silence that comes after a true name falls away and before another one is earned. You have lived in that silence and had no word for it, and the absence of a word convinced you that you were the only one there. You are not. This room has always had a crowd in it. Everyone who has genuinely changed has stood exactly where you are standing now, nameless in the gap between selves, certain they were alone in it. People do almost anything to escape this room, because the emptiness reads to the nervous system as danger. And the most seductive escape, the one almost everyone reaches for, is the catalyst trap. Here is how it works. Something cracked you open. A relationship that ended. A person who hurt you badly, an illness, a loss, a betrayal. And because that event broke the old self, the mind does something clever and ruinous. It makes the event the center of your new identity. You become the person this happened to, the one who was betrayed, the one who survived the narcissist, the one whose life split into before and after. And it feels like meaning, because it gives the empty room a single piece of furniture to organize around. But look closely at what that does. It hands the authorship of your new self to the very thing that wounded you. It means the person who hurt you is still deciding who you are years later, just from the other direction. The wound becomes the throne, and you spend your one life decorating it. The catalyst was real. The pain was real. But a self built entirely around the thing that broke you is just another mask, a darker one, and the empty room is asking you for something harder than a story about your damage. Think of a woman who left a marriage that had slowly erased her. For 2 years afterwards, she was extraordinary at being the one who got out. She read everything. She could name every tactic, explain exactly what had been done to her, recognize it in a stranger across a room. And one night she saw it. She had built a whole identity out of the escape, and the man she left was still the lead character in her story, recast as the villain but never written out. She had traded one cage for a colder one. Her life did not begin again until she stopped narrating the damage and sat with the harder question. Not what was done to me. Who am I now, when I am no longer proving I survived it? And underneath all of it waits the recognition almost no one says out loud, the one that makes the empty room feel less like loss and more like a reckoning. Some of the old self was never real either. This is the part that grief gets wrong, and it is why the grief feels so confused. You think you are mourning a good person you used to be. Then, in some clear and merciless moment in the empty room, you see it. Some of that kindness was fear wearing kindness as a coat. Some of that patience was avoidance, the refusal to risk a conflict that needed to happen. Some of that generosity was a transaction, a way of buying a safety you were never sure you had. The self you are mourning was partly a performance even to itself, and you cannot fully grieve it until you stop pretending the whole of it was true. That is the floor of the Nigredo. That is as black as the blackening gets. Not the death of a good self, but the discovery that the self you were defending was already half costume, and that the grief you have been carrying has no funeral because the thing that died was never quite alive in the way you believed. And it is precisely here, at the bottom, that the only real choice you have left finally appears. Everyone who reaches the bottom of this faces the same fork, and the two paths look almost identical at the start. Both begin with clarity. Both begin with seeing through the performance, your own and everyone else's. The difference is what you do with the seeing. The first path is bitterness, and it is the easier one, which is why so many intelligent people end there. The shadow, newly freed, takes all that hard-won clarity and turns it into a wall. You have seen how people love to function instead of you, so you decide that all love is transactional. You have caught yourself performing, so you decide everyone is only performing, and you withdraw behind the insight as if it were wisdom. It feels like strength. It even feels like truth. But look at what it is actually doing. It is using the death of the false self to justify never being seen again. It is the persona's last and cleverest trick, building a new mask out of the very clarity that was supposed to end the masking. The bitter one is not free. They have just exchanged a warm cage for a cold one. The second path asks more of you, and it is the entire point of the descent. It is to keep the clarity and choose connection anyway, to see exactly how love can attach to a function and still decide to let someone see the face under the mask, knowing the risk completely. Not the naive openness of the old self, which gave itself away to be accepted. A chosen openness, with the eyes fully open. You stop performing intimacy and start risking it. That is the difference. The old self connected by disappearing into what people wanted. This self connects by remaining fully present, no longer for sale. And the work of this path is mostly subtraction, not addition. You are not building a more impressive self to replace the one that died. You are removing what was never you to begin with, the agreeableness that was fear, the patience that was avoidance, the role you were handed before you could refuse it. Watch how this changes an ordinary day. Someone asks you for a favor that the old self would have granted before the sentence was finished, and you feel the reflex fire, and this time you let a silence sit in the place where the automatic yes used to be. You notice you are allowed to want what you want without building a case for it. You catch a flash of anger, and instead of filing it away as something a good person would not feel, you let it tell you where a line actually is. None of this is dramatic from the outside. No one watching would see a transformation. But each of these is a small refusal to put the mask back on, and the new self is assembled out of exactly these refusals, one quiet no at a time. What remains after that subtraction is not a new mask. Jung called it the self, with a weight on the word the false self never carried. Not the ego you perform, the center underneath it, the thing the whole dissolution was clearing a path toward, the part of you that was there before the mask and waited the entire time for the costume to finally fail. And here is the turn that reframes everything you have grieved. You have been mourning the people you used to be as if you lost something whole. But they did not die because death came for the best of you. They died because they were never the whole of you. They were only the part that could survive the life you had not outgrown yet. The agreeable one, the available one, the one who kept the room calm at the cost of keeping nothing of their own. They were the most you could be while you still needed to be held. When you stopped needing that, they had nothing left to do, and a self with nothing left to do does not linger. It vacates. The death was never the catastrophe. The death was the evidence. Evidence that there was more of you than the role could hold. So this is what walks out of the dark night. Not a healed version of who you were. Not the old self, restored and grateful, having learned its lesson. Something the old self could not have imagined, because the old self existed precisely to prevent it. What walks out is the first version of you that was never built for anyone else's comfort. It is quieter than the performance. It takes up less space and somehow more. It does not perform warmth, so the warmth it does offer is real and therefore rarer. It disappoints people who love the function, and it can survive disappointing them, which the old self never could. It is not impressive in the way the mask was impressive. It is just true, and you will find that true is a thing you can finally stand inside without exhaustion. But do not mistake this for the end of the descent. It is the end of the first one. Because the moment you stop performing the self you were given, you become aware of something else in the room. A presence that has been waiting underneath the whole time. Patient, unhurried. The part of you that authored none of the masks and watched all of them fall. The self does not arrive all at once. It announces itself, and then it asks to be known. That is the next ascent, and it is the one worth staying for. So before you go, sit with the question this whole video has been circling and leave your answer below. Because the people who find this need to know they are not the only ones who have stood in the empty room. When you think back across everything you have let die this year, the roles, the relationships, the version of you that everyone relied on, which loss was secretly a relief? Which death, when you are honest, felt less like grief and more like a window finally opening? Name it. The naming is where the next self begins.
Empaths aren't broken. They're alchemists in progress. The Alchemist's Path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com.